Home and Away back up to 4th place in my rankings for April 2022, up from I think 6th place last month. Now, I would say that Home and the Restless being up in the ranking is more because shows like Hollyoaks and Shortland Street kind of weren't very good in April, and not because Home and Away was like great or anything. But I still think Home and Away has two good storylines similar to The Young and the Restless that it keeps it high in the rankings right now. The rest of the show, there's other stories on the show, unlike The Young and the Restless, where there's not a lot of other stories. But the other stories aren't really that good right now, or are kind of just finally being introduced, really. The main story for me on Home and Away that was compelling was the Theo story. You know, they at first kind of reconnected Theo and Chloe, which was like one of the almost couples I enjoyed in 2021. But Chloe's been going through it, and she's been reacting poorly to people ever since she, had to kill her father in self-defense, and then her mother's husband died trying to take the fall for her. So she's been going through it, but I do like that we at least had that connection. But the main story for me has been Theo and his abusive father coming to town, trying to get back in Theo's good graces. Of course, Justin and Theo's aunt trying to keep him out of his life, kind of, especially Justin. But Theo's father, Dimitri, not liking that Justin seems to be the new father figure in Theo's life. We get to a point where Dimitri attacks Justin, and Justin has a seizure. And so Theo finally has to tell the police about his father's abusive past. I think they did good with the story, and I've always liked the character of Theo so far. So this story worked for me, and I think it was the most compelling story going on Home and Away right now. One of the reasons I'm not as high on Home and Away as I would like to be, because back in the fall I talked about how Home and Away is just always exciting, and since its return in 2022, it hasn't really brought the over-dramatic excitement that I like. In fact, I would say between the two Australian soap operas, Neighbours feels more like Home and Away, and Home and Away feels more like Neighbours. And I don't know if that's because Neighbours is winding down to its last episode ever. But Home and Away just isn't bringing the drama like they usually do. But I hope we get there. So the Theo story was the closest we had to the Home and Away vibe that I like. Of there's always danger around the corner, and the stakes always seem kind of high, even if you have an idea of where the story is going. Home and Away can be good at getting the stakes high, even for characters that aren't super important, I guess I will say. The other storyline that is working for me is the Mia and Chloe story. Now, it didn't get as much airtime this month as March, especially on the Chloe side. Chloe had been kind of being obsessed with Bella and just kind of going through it. This month it was more Mia going through it, and Mia and her daughter kind of having a falling out because they went through this really traumatic thing together where obviously Chloe had to kill her father to protect her mother, Mia, and then Mia's husband dies while trying to take the fall for Chloe. So I think, these two going through it is normal. Some of these other American soap operas would never actually even give this a thought. I mentioned on General Hospital how Drew went through this really traumatic event of being held hostage for so long, yet he's the one going around as the town therapist, and that's just stupid. So here, we have this really traumatic event. Even though Home and Away is very plot-driven, they still took the time for these past few months to dive into the characters of Mia and Chloe and how they are reacting to the events that happened. And I think they did a good job of that. In the end, though, Mia ends up leaving the show, heading to New Zealand to try and find closure for the events going on. So we lose another character, and it's another character I like, and this is becoming a trend on Home and Away as well. that kind of makes me worry about the rest of this year if characters I like keep leaving and if they're missing that exciting element. But for now, it's still in the top part of the rankings. We'll quickly touch upon some of the other stories. We have the McKenzie story, who kind of has to turn to illegal gambling. This story isn't working for me. I'm having a hard time becoming invested in this story because I feel like over the past couple years, a lot of different soap operas had gambling stories or gambling problem stories. So Home and Away doing it now after seeing it on other soap operas, I'm just not connecting with it. And it kind of seems like this could be one of the main stories going into May. So I don't know if that bodes well if I'm not really investing or getting invested in it. We also had more of Jasmine and her siblings, Xander and Rose, and she having a hard time connecting with them and them wanting to just leave town because she's not connecting with them. And then there was kind of a little rivalry between Jasmine and Rose. Even though Jasmine wants them to stay in town and try to get to know them, they had like this volleyball off where Jasmine ended up hurting Rose's nose because the volleyball hit her in the face. This was kind of like an odd mix of comedic relief and them just kind of trying to establish new characters, I guess, of Xander and Rose. I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it either. But I mean, I feel like it's just the beginning of the story. Hopefully it could get more interesting than where it is right now. But those are kind of the only stories I wanted to talk about for Home and Away in the month of April. I'm having a hard time connecting with most stories. And with Mia departing, that kind of ends half of that story. And the Theo and his dad stuff, I don't know if that's fully closed. I feel like Dimitri has more maybe villainous things in him, but I don't know for sure. So with Home and Away, it is up in my rankings to 4th place, but it's kind of on shaky ground with me because I don't know if there's going to be enough intriguing stories going forward to keep me invested. But I hope Home and Away can get its vibe back to becoming this really super dramatic show that I'd love to watch.